Hello and welcome to How It Started, a case study featuring my very first client, the one and only Rachel Ray Henry. I got an idea to do this particular case study after receiving some amazing feedback around one that I did early in 2020 or late 2020 about my brother, who is an aspiring filmmaker. Um, there were so many people who could relate to his story and really enjoyed the process of watching us organically talk through his journey. And so I wanted to do the very same thing for my career. I think it'd be very helpful to talk about what were my highs and lows, what were those major milestones, and just share my experiences. Before we get into it, there were some questions that were sent to me ahead of time, and I really appreciate that I will kind of explore and walk through. If there are additional questions, feel free to send them my way, and I will get to them if I can. But we are going to try to keep this particular case study down to 30 minutes. So let's see how we do. All right, how it started. So as you can see here on the cover, there are 4 major milestones that I like to talk about when I am referring to my journey. And the most recent of them is right here in 2021. And I'm very excited about that because you get the real-time experience of Creative Flow Alchemy as it's been recently trademarked. And this process has been in motion for at least a year now. But let's take it all the way back. Let's get to know what exactly is Creative Flow Alchemy. It is a journey through 4 creative seasons. It's a process. And I've broken this particular process down into these 4 seasons because they have represented the 4 major milestones that I believe everyone in their career path will experience, not just one time, but at any given point where there is a major calling, change in direction, purpose, idea that is needing nurturing. And I'm going to talk to you about how you can experience it both in your career, but also just in your creative endeavors personally. So the first season is the inquisitive season. The second is the inspired. The third is the intuitive. And the fourth is the intentional. At the Millennial Magic Movement, this framework known as Creative Flow Alchemy is what we consider the number one tool for helping millennials discover, embody, and expand their heart-centered passions. Every single season has its own diverse range of characteristics. So it's got its own personality, its own flavor, its own sauce. And when you figure out where you are on your journey, it will give you great clarity and allow you to, with intention, transform whatever it is that you want in your life. Whether that's, I want to make more money, I want to travel the world, I want to leave behind a legacy by also living one here on this planet. It is so important that you know where you are in order to make decisions that will continue to propel you on your journey to get to the inquisitive season. And honestly, to just feel extreme satisfaction, because that's what we're here to feel. I'm a firm believer that life is meant to be lived and that it is God's greatest wish. The universe is always conspiring for us to have the fullness of life. And my hope is that the Creative Flow Alchemy journey gives us a roadmap and some understanding as creatives for how to get to that satisfaction and then how to share that with the world. If you have not already, please consider taking our quiz so you can know where you are in your journey, and you'll be part of our community where you'll get resources for how to navigate it, affirmations, probing questions, just all of the things that can support you where you are. All right. So the inquisitive season, I'll just do a quick teaching on it, and then I'll talk to you about my particular inquisitive season. This is a time where your mind is just overwhelmed with possibility and creativity. And I like to mark this season with the term play. It is a time where you are excited about that fresh wind that has just happened in your life. Maybe in the case of my brother's case study, I think it was the first time that he watched the Hulk. That is what sparked him. Well, for me, my journey started quite some time before when I think about what inspired me as a child, I always wanted to be a journalist. That's what I always said growing up. I want to be a journalist. I didn't know about how to do that or what that looked like in terms of the formalities, but I wanted to tell stories that were important, bottom line. And so growing up, I was on all of the I think as early as elementary school, I was on the school newspaper committee all the way through high school. Wanted to write stories, impact people, tell really like the underdog's tale. I wanted people to know about all the incredible work that was underground and behind the scenes that often gets unrecognized and goes uncelebrated. And so my inquisitive season, like many, started way back in childhood. But life is interesting and it's full of twists and turns and unforeseen circumstances. And as a child, I didn't know that all of that potential, all that like God energy that wanted to be expressed, needed to have a certain level of support, a certain level of direction, nurturing. And a lot of that I just missed out on for circumstantial, reasons, from being the oldest child in my family and having to be responsible for caregiving quite a bit, to sometimes being in quite traumatic circumstances and experiences, and ultimately feeling like I always had to sacrifice and put down the things that made me happy in order to be of service to others. Now, I could talk about the root of that, but that's not what this particular case study is about. But what I will say is that if you identify with having a passion in your childhood, something that lights you up, but having roadblocks that were really hard to overcome, and now you're in your adult life kind of getting that little bit of a itch in the back of the neck, or that little calling, what I like to call your divine chime, or your intuition is guiding you back towards that thing. This is usually that season. It's when that creativity is just overwhelming and all it wants is to be expressed in any kind of way, and play is an excellent way to do that. So I'll talk to you about some ways that I incorporated play during my season. And of course, this was in reflection. I want to be very clear. As I journey through my case study, this is something that I have been able to pull together from reflection, because while I was living it, it wasn't called Creative Flow Alchemy, but that doesn't change the fact that it was happening. Okay, so before I talk too much about 2012, I want to give you the backstory. I moved to Chicago 2008 and started my career at Columbia College as an undergrad studying fashion retail management. My vision at the time was I would want to get into fashion journalism. And so I would have a degree that would give me the opportunity to get both management experience, but then take that information and apply it to a potential grad degree at Medill at Northwestern. That was my divine plan. That was my great idea. As fate would have it, here I am in a much different space, but I still followed my calling, and I honored that interest in being a journalist, and it's taken me to an incredible place. Here I am today. So, all right. 2008, get to Columbia, and for the first couple of years in Chicago, my focus was my education. Like many people, freshmen and early in your college, career, you're figuring it out. You're trying to navigate the work-life balance of being an adult for the first time when you're really not quite an adult, and society expects you to do so well. Throw me in a big city. Making new family and making new friends, communicating with the little bit of family I have, making resources out of nothing. That was what my inquisitive season looked like. And the big milestone for me was in 2011 when I decided to leave my retail thread, which is what allowed me to continue my education during the time, but to take a big leap of faith and leave retail for a totally new environment, which was direct sales. Now, that environment was intense, very intense. And by direct sales, I am talking the door-to-door industry. My goodness, that was some of the hardest, ugliest, grimiest, but most fulfilling work I've ever had in my life. It quickly allowed me to see that this concept of money being intangible or hard to get was not true. And it also put me in a space where I saw grit and determination and dedication every single day, because people knew that simply by being themselves, they could provide for their families. Now, yes, there's some grunt work and all that, but I learned a lot from from the representatives and contractors that I worked for. One of those big lessons at that time was that who I am who I am as a person, my personality, is enough for me to be successful. And what I mean by that is I would watch those door to door reps every single day, get up, get dressed, walk out, knock on doors, and not necessarily the product be what people sold or bought into, but their identity, their charisma and their charm, the energy that they brought to the table. That's what people really sold into. And in fact, many of those people who I worked with are still my friends because of the fact that we really became family and learned how to navigate a community of dog eat dog world, work, and transmute that and convert that into something beautiful by taking those lessons and pulling it into a career that we could craft on our own, that we never had to go outside of ourselves to form. And what I mean by that is just that confidence, that self-assurance, every single day knocking on the door and dealing with rejection. I mean, if you can come out of that alive and well and thriving, you can pretty much do anything. And so at that time, I was an administrator. I wasn't necessarily knocking doors, but I did get in the field sometimes. I was able to understand the needs of every contractor, and I provided those needs. And eventually I went from working as the front desk administrator to opening tons of offices across the country and traveling and being able to say that I was able to bring a ray of light, some fresh wind into a culture that didn't quite have that. And so that was fun and hard. And I went through some major, major breakthroughs during that period. But when I came out of that in 2012, I made the decision to leave the industry with all of that newfound information, confidence, and skill sets, and apply it to my own business. Now, at that time, I didn't know that my business would be what it became. I wanted to start a resource blog, a blog that I called Everyday Sunray. And it was meant to be a space for not millennials, but at that time, all creators, especially those who were fresh out of college or kind of in that in-between space to come into and promote themselves and get access to resources, kind of pulling all my marketing and sales experience into a creative zone for those who really just didn't know where to start. So I set off with a pretty big goal in 2012 with having just left my job. I'm going to set off to interview a Grammy Award winning artist. I don't care who it is. I know I want to go big or go home. I tend to do these really crazy things when I have big ideas. And so I set off and set in motion the desire. I followed my that inquisitiveness, and allowed myself to play, which means that I reached out to different PR companies. I wrote press releases for the first time. I took, again, all this work from my door-to-door industry and applied it to myself. I pitched myself. I figured out how to work with other creatives to build a website. I studied endlessly on Google back when it first was Google, right? Early in the days. And I worked really hard to pull all these resources into something that made sense until I could formulate a proper pitch. Reached out to, again, many of those PR companies that had events coming up with very little time. I think I had about 90, maybe less than 90 days to get my idea from inception to launch, including a launch party that I announced prior to having an artist for the event or for my first blog. Well, without going too far into that story and kind of the rabbit hole that could be, I ended up landing through divine intervention an interview with Chrisette Michelle. And it was incredible. I can't tell you how fortunate I felt to have stepped out on faith and trusted my abilities to use not just my like street smarts that I've gained throughout my career in door-to-door sales, but also all of my retail experience, because I've been working since I was a 15-year-old child. And being able to be a retail manager, a shift leader, a leader of any kind requires that you have to find a way to work with resources and to trust that those resources, as you follow each breadcrumb, will lead to the next. And that is how I ended up with this particular interview as my first blog release on Everyday Sunray. Now, this experience was what I thought the culmination, like the big moment for me in my inquisitive season. However, that was just the beginning. As soon as my blog launched, I had so many people in Chicago and beyond, friends from high school, reaching out and saying, "Oh my God, this is so cool. How did you do this? Like, you just came out of nowhere with this. Like, you were gone. It went from 0 to 100, as they say, right?" And I did not necessarily have a formula to give them. It was still all in my head and all in my heart, still happening real time. And I sat down, looked at all the requests, and honestly, I left it at that. I focused on getting my next blog, which went on to become, I believe, Dwelle as my second celebrity artist. Shout out to Swank PR, which was the company that believed in me when I first started, and Brianna Gatlin, who is the young woman who is the owner of that particular PR firm. But anywho, it was because of all of those inquiries and questions, and honestly, just the love and support, that this idea sparked in the back of my head that, wow, I wonder if I can take and use the information that I've done for myself and apply it into some kind of process, something that I can give to others. And how can I do it in a way that's sustainable? Now, by sustainable at 21, that just means how can I pay my bills by doing this? Because I love it, but I still got to figure out a way for this blog to be monetized, which at this moment, I don't see how I'm going to do that. But everybody seems to want to help me, or have me help them build a website or pitch to an artist, pitch to an audience, get their mixtape heard, whatever it is that was important at that particular time to an artist. I was somehow being thrown in the middle of that. And of course, during my blog release party, I met quite a few people, and those relationships became later on clients. And those clients led me to opening my very first consulting firm, Sunray Consulting Group. That was an incredible journey that lasted in my life from approximately end of 2012 to about 2015. And I mark Everyday Sunray as the milestone in my inquisitive season, because while I did not continue that blog, it was the catalyst for me to open up myself to see that there was something so much more behind what I thought I was doing. And by simply trusting my intuition, it guided me into opening a very successful consulting firm, one that I built my first team with, one that we helped countless entrepreneurs and small business owners locally in Chicago, and so many of them Black owned as well. I made so many mistakes. I made so many triumphant moments. Everything that you can experience as a business owner, I got to do, and not on purpose, simply because I followed my intuition. And that was a big learning lesson. So I'm really grateful for that particular season. And it allowed me to comfortably be able to say that there is no work greater than the mess that you make along the way. Because while I was so set on creating a blog, God was asking me to just take a step and allow for more to come through. And that became Sunray Consulting Group. Now, let's talk about what happens when you start a business and you didn't plan it. You probably don't have much structure. You're likely operating on, figure it out, a lot of lack of sleep, no boundaries, and quite a bit of sacrifice. Yeah, that was me. I loved the work that I was doing, deeply satisfied by the work. but I was ill prepared to run a business at that time. And I burnt out. So in 2015, I closed the doors to Sunray Consulting Group. And you've probably, if you follow me, you've heard this story, but I took a hiatus, very necessary sabbatical, and I needed to just focus on my wellness. I'd spent at that point from 15 to 25, 10 years working. And people don't often talk about what it's like when you are extremely required to be responsible as a young person, and then also entering the workforce so young. So for 10 years of my young life, I was already well indoctrinated into corporate America in a way. And that burnout hit me hard. So whatever was necessary for me to take care of myself, whether I wanted to or not, that's what I had to do. And so that meant saying goodbye to my team, which broke my heart. It meant saying goodbye to my comfort. It meant saying goodbye to all the networking and hard work that went into building a reputation. That's it. But there was so much freedom found in putting down everything that meant so much to me to pick myself back up. I found yoga. I found my breath. I found my identity outside of my career. And that changed my life. That sparked my inspired season. The inspired season is a time where you truly are aware of what your purpose is here on this planet. In my case, I had gotten a lot of clarity through the navigating running a business and doing it on accident, so to speak. From wanting to be a little girl wanting to be a journalist to now being a consultant on accident, a project manager on accident, so to speak. I'd done a lot of work putting down the career focus and taking care of myself. And the Inspire season really is all about that. It's like, I've done my inner work. I've taken the time to get to the root of what it is that my identity is asking to be expressed, and what it is that God is fueling me with. I understand how my creativity connects to my identity. That's this season. That is the Inspire season. And for me, the culmination of that season, while it spanned for a few years, it really culminated with my particular birth of my process known as the Blisspreneurs Journey. Everything in this season was taking my lessons, the things that brought me some successes, and putting it into a practical framework that other people could use without me having to give all of myself to it. So at this point, my focus was switching the giving of my time as much as I had in the past into giving something, at that time, I wouldn't say that it was just focused on like a digital service or offering, but just giving information that could be applied at any stage of your career. And that was where the Blisspreneurs Journey was birthed. It was the birth of the framework that I now know as Creative Flow Alchemy. I had to sit down, document my process, give it actionable steps, basically break down and decode it, and then put it into a package that someone could understand. And that became a 3-phase journey with 7 steps. Very powerful time of my life. And it was the beginning of speaking on a totally different level. I went from behind the mic, interviewing other creative people, to getting in front of the mic and allowing my voice to be heard for the first time confidently. At least the first time since I was a poet or oratorical performer in my youth. But I felt the return of those gifts in the most incredible way, one that was deeply fulfilling and purposeful. And the inspired season was just, I don't know. I would like to say that in my heart of hearts, it was the first time I saw Rachel and chose Rachel. So I'll skip over this because we won't play the videos, but here's another picture of me during that time giving a workshop. I focus a lot of my work during that period on branding still, because Summer Consulting Group, we were a brand and marketing, full service brand and marketing consulting firm. So it was only in my nature, to continue to teach some of those branding aspects through the Blisspreneurs journey. Another key milestone during this season for me was the blog 7 Days of Bliss. And that was a wellness centered blog. So I was able to take some of my, lessons from focusing on my own wellness and integrate it with being a business owner. And that changed the game for me. So while I won't talk about that for too much, I just want to point out that the intersection of my wellness and my career at that inspired season it was no longer separate. I knew that they had to come together for me to feel whole, and be of service to anyone at all. So this was the last season. This particular Blisspreneurs journey was the last season of separating work from wellness, and my identity finally had this merging in the season which followed. Another key notable moment during, I would say, between the inquisitive and the inspired season for me was, this fun event that I hosted called Dine and Wine. During my downtime, before I got into the inspired season, I wanted to just be around my people and cook and host and give people a good time. And that was Dine and Wine. People were able to come. I would make all of these amazing dishes, demonstrate how to cook them, pull us all together in a room to eat well together and just feel good celebrating each other. I also would make a signature drink. And so that Dine and Wine experience, it was really just for my pleasure. It allowed me to have fun and to show up and serve again in a way that satisfied me and brought together all the elements of what I love: food and music and people and culture and community in one space. So hold on to that while we talk about the next season, the intuitive season. Okay, so the inquisitive season, again, as a recap, the very first season is all about that spark. I'm interested. I don't know where this is going, but I'm going to follow the breadcrumbs. The inspired season is all about getting out there, putting yourself out there, allowing that inspiration to dictate your actions, or guide your actions, and hopefully dictate the next steps you'll take in your career and in your life. But this intuitive season is exactly where what I was talking about, where the merging of my true self and from a wellness identity standpoint, me as a woman, me as a human, me as an individual, before me as a business owner, me as a creative, me as before, instead of having these separate kind of hierarchical phases of myself or versions of myself, that was the first time I could merge them and bring them together. And I feel really good being able to say that the intuitive season is often where people who come to work with me are. They have done experimentation, they have played, they have began to lean in on their strengths, and now they're ready to get out of the hustle and into true alignment. And they want to do it with the values that they've gotten very clear on their journey. So this season is where, you begin to pave the way for your life's work, your true life's work. And it is during the intuitive season that I took those elements of community, connection, and culture that I talked about with Dine and Wine, and I allowed that piece to merge with, again, wellness and identity for myself and being of service. And I pulled that all together to create what I would say was, let me slow down. Before the 2019, there was a period in, I want to say 2018, where I was sitting in my bed And I heard God loud as day. I mean, you cannot make it up. The feeling of just total conviction, my entire body having this experience of certainty. I heard the words, live rich, be well. And I remember crying and saying thank you, because it was like for the first time in some years, everything that I've been doing, I've been asking for clarity on. And just, you always want to make sure you're on your journey and not being influenced by those outside of you. But I heard live rich, be well. And I felt not only was that my instruction, but it was my mantra, it was my affirmation, and it was my confirmation that I was moving in the right direction. Now, life is funny because I also, right after putting up that particular project, 7 Days of Bliss, had a crazy experience in my family that made me have to put it right back down and focus on taking care, being a caregiver in a way again. So I hadn't really mastered the piece on boundaries, but I did know that my work was moving in the right direction and that I was on my path. However, my boundaries were not intact. And that is why the intuitive season is so important, because it is a time where you're establishing your boundaries personally for yourself, but also with how you're engaged and interact with others in the world. So my intuitive season is where Live Rich Be Well. And this particular picture was the very first or second supper club, because we went from Dine and Wine as just this like fun side thing to me establishing a supper club, something I could do a few times a year and truly like bring my people together to talk about life, business, our community, and do it family style, where we are sitting around each other, among each other, breaking bread and masterminding, but doing it in a setting that is designed for us to experience the richness and the fullness of life. And this season was so great because not only did I see it was affirmed through the joy I felt, but from the people who came out to support this, family and friends. I had friends flying in from across the country. I had friends from both of the high schools I graduated from, traveling to Chicago to support me, purchase a ticket to an event they knew nothing about. They didn't even know what they were going to eat. And they filled up the space as I did a restaurant takeover on my 28th birthday. And this was the green light from spirit that everything that I needed to do had to encompass those values of community, of connection, of culture, of creativity, and of service. Those were the values that I knew I had to lean in on as I continued to allow the intuitive season to work its magic. And that takes me to where I am today. The intentional season. It's where you go from shifting your perspective from the me, the I am the I am here to do. I am here to receive, which is so important as a foundation in your journey. But it is the first and most important phase that you have to go through in order to get to the other side of what is the we, the service or impact centered approach to creativity. It's when you are 100% clear about who you are, what you're here to do, and what it is that is needed in society. When I was starting my blog, Everyday Sunray, I had intention to serve at a great level, but I didn't have the practice, the experience that naturally comes with time and by going through these seasons. Now, with Millennial Magic Movement and the entire Creative Flow Alchemy framework, I can truly say that my life's purpose is being 100% shown through this work, and that I have created something that allows for me to continuously evolve while maintaining the foundation of my values. and always being able to say that this work is done in service to something so much greater than even I understand at this moment. In the intentional season, your focus is the lived legacy as well as the one you'll leave behind. It is when you are thinking about, as a business owner, how does this business fit into the greater economy, into the service of society? How does it directly impact my neighbor? How am I taking care of the individuals on my team? It's how you run your business. If you've reached this stage in your career, you're likely in thought leadership, influencing others and the decisions that they make through what you believe and what you stand for. And it's okay if you get to this season and find that you have completed one chapter and are now starting another. For example, what I mean by that is, I know someone right now, one of my clients, who has journeyed through her Creative Flow Alchemy seasons and is now embarking on a totally new inquisitive season. And that's what I want to talk to you about. I think that was one of the questions that was asked. In fact, I'm going to kind of get into the questions now. I'm going to see, there was one in particular. There was a question: does this cycle only happen once in your life or in your career? The answer is no. The Creative Flow Alchemy Journey, it sets off in motion the inquisitive season. Every single time you have an idea that you begin to put in motion and put energy behind. But let's be clear that not every idea will cycle fully. There will be projects that fail. There will be times where you need to pivot, and it's all a part of the process. But when you get that aha moment, that moment of, there's something here for me, usually anytime that you begin to invest your resources, be it your time, your energy, your money, making that kind of investment, is when you fully enter into this season or into this journey. But the inquisitive season, again, is really a time of play and exploration. So you can experiment here and not fully have to commit to, I'm starting a business or this is my career. You can just play. So if you're someone who, let's say you want to, play tennis and you want to compete one day, your goal is to just compete at a career level, maybe get some sponsorships. Obviously, that is a very serious thing to get into as an adult, because your whole body, you'll have to train yourself from ground up to be able to do something like that. But I see athletes do it all the time. People who decide that this is what they want to do, they focus their attention towards it, they do the proper training necessary, they get the support they need, they sculpt themselves, they mold themselves into athletes, and they do it through tenacity and grit and through discipline and sacrifice and training. So if that is where you are and you know that this is something you want to do, you probably wouldn't just jump in and say, tomorrow I'm going to go compete and I'm going to be a part of, a grand tennis match, right? No, you likely start by taking some classes and just having a little bit of fun. Or another example, let's say you want to open a restaurant. You probably aren't going to tomorrow go look at a building and say, you know what, it's time for me. I'm going to make this menu. I'm going to take out this loan or I'm going to use my existing capital to buy this building, and boom, that's it. You'll probably want to start in your inquisitive season by visioning the kind of customers, the kind of experience, the kind of food, allowing yourself to simply vision and play. Maybe you'll cook some of those things. Maybe you'll start to visit other businesses and read about what it takes to become a restaurateur. Maybe that's step one. As you transition into your inspired season, that's where you start putting down some of those roots of, I'm ready to make financial investments into this in a way that shows I'm serious. Like, I'm going to build a business plan. I'm going to talk to and set up some networking opportunities. I'm going to, craft my first dining experience. Maybe I'll rent a space and do a test kitchen or a beta event, and just allow people to give me feedback so I can go back to the table and see where I can make improvements. The last thing you want to do in your inquisitive season is go all the way in. Just allow yourself the process of discovery. All right, another question someone asked me is, can this apply to me if I'm already happy in my career, but I just feel uninspired in life? Oh, that's a great question. Okay. Creative Flow Alchemy is not just a career cycle. It is a cycle of creativity. So this is excellent for anyone. Let's pretend you are, working an amazing career, you're in leadership, or you love your job. It brings you joy, and that is enough for you. But you aren't necessarily feeling the spark of life and feel like there are things that you could be doing more of to just show gratitude for this vitality that is your life. This journey still applies to you, and you can still get all the way to into the intentional season by following your joy every step of the way. So if you're someone who maybe just feels stuck in your day-to-day in the mundane, especially in a time where our society is experiencing such turmoil, I invite you to revisit childhood and think about what sparked joy then, and maybe allow yourself the simple pleasure of experimenting with that for a little bit, and do it without restriction or expectation. That's key. Another big element that I would recommend, and if you have not watched our masterclass, Trust Your Own Magic, I would watch it, because we talk a lot about the foundations for just like your life, for creative living. All right. Another question. Can you be in 2 seasons at once? Oh my goodness. Yes, you can. And what I mean by that is, Creative Flow Alchemy is not a linear journey. Creative Flow Alchemy is a process. And so when we look at, let's go back to the particular framework. It's constantly evolving into itself, right? So at any given season, you're still kind of overlapping and touching other parts of another. And I think that's so important to see, because I don't want you to think that it's go from point A to B to C to D, or from A to Z. That's not how that works. It is a constantly evolving spiral. And I think that it's key that you're going to notice these markers of like these subtle changes from the inquisitive to the inspired, or the inspired to the intuitive, and so forth. When I was in my inspired season experimenting with dine and wine, I didn't know that would lead me into my intuitive season, which would later be Sunray Supper Club. But they were very much so happening in a simultaneous way. So yes, you can be experiencing the characteristics of 2 seasons at one time. However, you're going to know based on the particular characteristics of that season which one is dominant and which one you should allow to fully cycle through before committing to some of the key actions that you would take in the next season. All right, let's see another question. Does the CFA process take about the same amount of time for people, or does it vary greatly on each person? Oh, I mean, this could be 100% different for every single person. But what I can say is that the research I've done with my clients and with millennials who have taken our quiz is that we do have a similar life cycle in our journeys, but every single person is going to go ahead, especially if we're referring specifically to career, we're going to cycle through it differently and have these unique experiences. So for me, I would say, just from this case study, each of my seasons lasted for approximately 3 years. So it's not an overnight thing. And that doesn't mean that you can't cycle through a full journey in 1 year. But my particular journey, each season had about a 3-year span. I'd be very interested in doing another case study and seeing one of my clients and seeing exactly what their timeline was like, which I might do for a follow-up to this. Okay, another question. What can you explain about making the shift from journalist to speaker, leader, guide in your career? Any moments that stand out to you about this switch? Oh, for sure. Again, I mentioned wanting to be a journalist as a child, and it was a recent interview I had with a friend of mine for our show, where she asked me the question, did you become who you wanted to be when you grew up? Right? And so, in one way, did I become a journalist? And when she asked me that, I kind of stumbled. I was like, no, I guess not. And it took me a minute to even just give myself the appropriate recognition for the fact that, yes, I had, in fact, become a journalist. Just not, a Medill trained journalist, but someone who still told someone else's stories and did it in blog format and self publishing. I definitely achieved those things. Um, However, my particular transition from journalism to speaker and leader and guide, as you asked, I would say 100% could be seen happening the entire time. I've not changed much about my reason for wanting to be a journalist. I just don't have that title. My reason was to tell the underdog story. I wanted to make sure that the things behind the scenes were recognized and rewarded and were able to be seen and shared with the masses, because it's often the stories that go untold that have such significant value. And so, in one way, while I'm not a journalist, I am definitely still reporting and sharing and extending the voice of others through my platform. And now, even when we look at Instagram Live, and yeah, it's not, there are going to be people who argue, and that's okay, that that's not formal journalism. But at the end of the day, we have to look at how media is reaching society today. How are we affected by media today? Because journalism is news and information. We are not here to talk about good or bad, simply what it is. News and information being reported and shared. When we get into the what's good and what's bad, that's when we get away from the true definition of that. And so, to answer your question, I'm very much so still sharing the good news. All right, let's see. And then I'm just going to do a couple more questions and we're going to wrap. What was my favorite season and why? And then what was my least favorite season and why? Oh, man. Okay. My favorite season? That's hard. I gotta say it was my inquisitive season, to be honest. I just loved waking up and following the breadcrumbs and watching like how clients showed up during, from the blog to the consulting group, working with my team, like that whole. And this is a good point of showing like the Creative Flow Alchemy Journey in one project as opposed to your entire career. I would 100% say that Sunray Consulting Group cycled through at least 3 of the 4 Creative Flow Alchemy Journey seasons on its own. So the inquisitive season being that moment when I realized, hey, this isn't just a blog, to being inspired enough to actually form the company, to intuitively letting that help me figure out my team, my clients, and the kind of work that we would do to impact our community. And I closed the door before I could reach that intentional season because I really needed to do more work within myself. I needed to do more inner work. And so I, pivoted, closed that door. But that was certainly my favorite season. And I would say my least favorite season, honestly, I don't know that I have a least, but the most challenging season that I've had to experience was my intuitive season. Again, that intuitive season. And that's because as someone who is extremely intellectual, but also extremely spiritual and emotional, it's sometimes challenging to find the balance between what I know is right for me at my core and what I think is right for me. And that's just a moment of full transparency. So my intuitive season was a little bit difficult for me because, I experienced, at least in my full career case study, I experienced the pandemic during my intuitive season, which means I had to make a big pivot. And that made me look at my life and all of my work and all the lives I've impacted and the ones who've impacted me, and get really clear about what it is that I want to be here for. I also finished my Saturn return during my intuitive season. So I think if I had to say, back to the question around, does it happen for everyone at once? For millennials and others, if you look at your Saturn return, for those of you who are familiar with that term, I think that you'll find we cycle through our intuitive season during that season of closing up that chapter. Okay, let's do another question. What were some habits or difficulties you had to overcome in order to get unblocked and to get where you are now? Okay, this is a great question. I just went over one of them, which is that intellect versus the emotion, or the spiritual, kind of pulls. And then getting back to trusting my DNA, which is my divine natural approach, which is, what it is that Creative Flow Alchemy exists for, to help you get back to your DNA, or what it is that is naturally your passion, your skill, your talent, and your purpose here on this planet. But some of the habits I had to break, I've always worked, like I said, since I was a child, being in service to others. So by the time I went to college and being significantly burnt out, I can see now that as I am an adult, when I look back at my life, I can see where I have sabotaged many opportunities because of unresolved and newly awakened trauma. And just feeling like I had to fight for my life and my identity and my worth and prove my values and personal and professional relationships. Those were distractions, and they ultimately took me away from my God-directed purpose. It took me being in isolation to really get clear and to make the commitment to doing my real work. So that overcoming that and first recognizing it and making the decision to do better, it needed to happen. And that I would say would be just the biggest habit to break, is allowing distractions to take me off my path. All right, I will do one more question. What would you say to someone who doesn't have formal education, who doesn't have a formal education or degree in a certain field, but wants to gain experience in that field? Any tips for starting out like that? Well, if I haven't done anything but share that so much of my journey was just putting myself out there, that's step one. If you do not have formal education and degree or field you want to get into, being a project manager by trade, I did not have formal education or experience, but I was able to see that by putting myself in rooms with other men and women who had experience, not only did it validate my life's lessons and the work and the professional work that I had done, but it also gave me an opportunity to stretch myself and to get out of my comfort. So if you are someone who wants to get experience, don't be afraid to stretch yourself. Put yourself in uncomfortable situations and allow yourself to figure it out. Don't be afraid to apply for jobs or start, put your business or idea out there, even if it seems completely unorthodox or it doesn't fit into society right now. I'm certain that there's someone who needs what you are being called. As long as it is really your calling, then it is something necessary for this world. I'm not telling you that means give up everything to focus only on that, because I do believe you should allow yourself the process of experimenting. And my greatest piece of advice would be probably that, experiment, make the mess. Do not be afraid to try something today and change your mind tomorrow. However, do it in a way that it allows you to still have stability. That would be, stability looks different for everyone, but what makes you feel grounded, safe, and stable is a good thing. And so I want you to have that as a foundation for experimenting in your field. Reach out to people and get mentorship would be my second tip. So put yourself in uncomfortable situations, find mentorship. Sometimes that means paying for a coach, working with someone one-to-one. At other times that might mean just, putting yourself in networking opportunities and emailing and sending out that request. Follow all of the free advice that so many amazing leaders are giving. They're giving so much. Your mentorship doesn't have to be talking to a person. Sometimes it could be reading their books, reading their blogs, taking their class. And then another piece of advice I would give, and this will be my last piece of advice I would say just in that regard to that, would be mastermind. Find a tribe. You cannot do it alone. You need a community. So if there's anything that I would recommend to you, it would be join a community like ours, like Creative Flow Alchemy Academy, because we come together and we support each other and we are a safe space to talk. But even if we're not your community, trust me, you are going to thrive when you can find your tribe, because they are going to tell you the truth. They're going to be your ear, your eyes, your advocates, your people who can critique you with the right intention, because you have established the safe space to do it, and the necessary checks and balances for how to give that appropriate feedback. Community is everything. So sometimes that might be having 2 to 3 people, and other times that might be being a part of a larger community. If you are, in a sorority or fraternity, if you have thought about joining an organization, a nonprofit, or a leadership organization, somewhere where you can be trained and certified and be among your peers, definitely get in the mix. That's what I would say. Get in the mix and don't be afraid. Just those 3 things will certainly put you in a position to receive what you cannot do alone. So that is my Creative Flow Alchemy journey. I hope that you have taken some key, milestones, sort of some tips from my key milestones from 2012 through 2021. I hope that this has been inspiring for you. I hope that you did leave with more questions, things to ponder on. And I hope that you'll consider not just our academy, but working with me one-to-one if you're someone who, you feel like you're at that intuitive season. Again, if you have not taken the quiz at our website, go find out where you are so you know exactly where a good entry point might be for you. Thank you again, and happy creating.